So let's take a look at a few of the best armies around for the Astra Militarum, and the units chosen by top players for strong guard army lists. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Imperial Guard once more. And in this video I thought it would be interesting to take another look in what's doing well for the Astra Militarum, the units that are getting picked in strong army lists, and what's making them so good right now. For this one I thought we'd take a look at 5 of the best performing guard lists over the past few weeks, and zero in on a few units that seem to be played really quite commonly, and how they fit into the overall army. Currently in Warhammer 40k and since the last balanced data slate, Guard have been in a kind of interesting spot. Stats wise, they've got a fairly low win percentage, around about 46% at big tournaments, which is maybe a little bit on the lower side for Warhammer 40k right now, though they certainly seem to be functional at the absolute top level of play, winning 7 big events since the balanced data slate, which shows that they do absolutely have the tools to go toe to toe with the nastiest stuff around when played by a good player with the right list to a top level. Considering their slightly low win rate, which might normally imply they're underpowered, I feel like the Guard are genuinely in not too bad a spot. Even if perhaps the top lists tend to be a bit convergent on just a few units, I'd argue the vast majority of the rest of the index is really quite usable and strong, and the knowledge that the best players around can take Guard to the top is definitely encouraging. I guess between those two there's a lot of draw to putting them on the table in competitive games. For their core rules, their orders are certainly a big strength. They give you a lot of options for big decisions, whether you're wanting extra mobility, damage, or playing objective games, then they can flex out to different things. They've got really quite strong indirect fire, which is a huge strength in a meta where there's not really all that much of that present right now. It means that quite a few armies won't necessarily be specifically prepping to be hit by a whole load of Basilisk or Manticore fire, which means that Guard can be a bad matchup for many. And their detachment rule, while it's not as impactful as the other two, I think, Born Soldiers, that can be helpful at punching up against enemy armies with really tough stuff, where the lethal hits makes a big difference, potentially allowing the guards to hit back really hard if the enemy pushes up the board too quickly, maybe with things like the odd tank commander, or even infantry unit that can afford to remain stationary for a turn and hit the enemy with excessively punishing damage. It's generally best for the artillery units though, and certainly helps out there. In any case though, let's take a look at a few strong army lists from good players who have managed to take them to the top, and take a look at the units and combinations being used. First up, from last weekend at time of recording, there were a couple of guard lists in the top 3 at the massive Oxford Super Major, an event with over 240 players. Placing second was this list by Nassim Fauchain, and as you'd expect, seems like a really quite honed example of a few of the units that are most commonly taken in these competitive lists. Perhaps the single biggest variation in this one is just how many Bullgryns are being used. There's an absolute maximal amount of them, with 3 units of 6 of them. A tanky guard battle line there, or brute shields and mauls. These guys are incredibly hard to take off the midfield objectives, and particularly for enemies that rely on high AP to get their damage done, they can make a lot of damage just go away. Big units like that do seem very intimidating, not just good at holding people up, but they will club you with a whole load of strength 7 and damage 2 attacks. And Lord Solar Leontas can give them orders as well for potentially really quite long charges, or helping them out on objectives, getting them up to OC2. It looks like Lord Solar will be combining with a platoon command squad, perhaps with one of those Kaschan jungle fighter units. There'd be a tanky base of orders to sit in the home field, throwing out 3 of Lord Solar's orders out to 24 inches with the Master Vox, plus the extra regimental one that you can get, and Ursula Creed looks like she'd be nearby, I'd guess probably attached to one of those Kasrkin units, but she can use her fields of fire to affect the mortar in the platoon command squad to hand out fields of fire each turn, so you can basically have one enemy unit debuffed by AP-1, which is kind of big alongside things like Basilisks and the tank commanders. For damage dealers, there are 2 tank commanders, both with demolisher cannons, las cannons, plasma cannons, and heavy stubbers. Just generally big dangerous tanks. They can be ordered by Lord Solar for +1 to hit, and then their ability is to shoot in death if the enemy targets them, so potentially could light up an enemy unit in their turn, which could be absolutely huge. To hold the midboard, there's a second unit of Kaschan jungle fighters, which could scout forward and provide some OC. There's 2 units of 10 Kasrkin, which are fast and just generally dangerous with plasma guns, melter guns, the melter mine and the marksman rifle. They can move, and also get take aim, and could be quite nice for reinforcements as well. There's 1 Sentinel to mark targets for reroll 1s to hit and ignore the indirect firepower, and then as mentioned there's a good artillery contingent, a Basilisk that can slow enemy movement, and then 2 Manticores with a big strength 10 damage 3 attacks, so a pretty terrifying amount of indirect firepower there. Should be enough to really stack the herd on whatever you choose to target on the board. Overall looks like an absolutely honed list, as you'd expect from one of 40k's best players. placing above over 200 people at a big event, and it looks like there was a fair amount of faction variety on the way to the top. The list beat Grey Knights, Custodes, Space Wolves, Ultramarines Vanguard, Chaos Demons, and some fellow Guard, before being pipped at the post by Adeptus Sororitas in the final. Focusing on some units to start with, let's talk about those Bullgryn, given that they're such an enormous feature of this list. Bullgryns are just kind of excellent for the Guard right now, 80 points per 3 of them. They're typically fielded with the Bullgryn Mauls and the Brute Shields for the 4+ invulnerable save, and currently they're largely preferred to infantry units to try and take the midfield, despite perhaps a slight lack of OC. The combination of a 4+ invulnerable save, -1 damage, and a 6+ feel no pain can just make a surprising amount of damage go away. They're really not too adverse to be hit by heavy weapons, and they still have enough threat in close combat that a squad of them will be happily bullying any enemy lighter infantry, and just through volume of attacks are likely to hit tough things pretty hard as well. Most top performing lists are running at least some of them. I feel like they're a unit that you just really can't go too far wrong with. Absolutely excellent for disruption and bullying enemies off objectives. Perhaps one of the other units to push forward and do infantry things on objectives are the Bullgryn Kasrkin, again a unit that tends to be run in multiples in the majority of competitive lists. They're guard veterans that come for 100 points in a squad of 10, hitting on a 3+ with a bunch of special weapons, and have a fun melter mine that can provide some annoying mortal wounds if the enemy does try and charge them. Perhaps their biggest advantages though are that they scout 6 inches, so they can take up a position in the midfield and try and be a good unit to hide out of line of sight on objectives. And then the fairly godly ability that allows them to basically get an extra order per turn, so you can have some really interesting combinations on these guys. They can flex into extra objective control, go super fast with move, 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 or combine either of those with +1 to hit for a 2+ ballistic skill. At 100 points, they're quite a good target for reinforcements as well, coming on at the edge of the board, and the way that Warrior Elites rule works, they can order themselves when they're off the board, so can potentially turn up with a bunch of special weapons hitting on 2s, which is fairly savage. Next up, and taking a look at Guard of a slightly different flavour, this list by John Russell was used to take first at Grand Clash 2024, going a big 5-0 in a fairly big tournament of 75 players. This one's got some fun choices in them, and it does eschew the Bullgryn that much of the rest of them use, but takes some other good stuff. There's a very scary looking big unit of 10 Tempestus Scions alongside a Scion command squad, and a big unit of 10 Rough Riders as well. The Tempestus Scions plus their command squad can be just incredibly dangerous out of deep strike. Now they can actually order after dropping, given the rerolls that the command squad gives them at base. They'll be punching with 3 melter guns and 3 plasma guns, plus some pistols and things, and could potentially be an interesting target for reinforcements if they are just wiped out in return. Otherwise, those Rough Riders are really quite cool to see on the board. I've not seen so many people playing them, but they are a pretty powerful counter-charge threat. Those lances with the +1 to wound can make a nasty mess of most anything. I feel like the biggest difficulty that players might have with them is trying to deliver them into combat without them getting shot up first, as they do have kind of mediocre defense for the cost, and things like heavy bolters go through them quick. Otherwise, there looks like there's some solid objective control heading towards the midfield, with a big unit of 20 Death Corps of Krieg with an attached Marshal, and to give them the 5+ feel no pain. And they're just a solid durable unit with lots of OC. They can heal themselves with the medic, and also be a good reinforcement target. Beyond that, we've got Gaunt's Ghosts, pinging on and off the board and being a great unit to do secondary objectives while just chipping away at enemy units. I feel like these guys perhaps went from strength to strength, now they can actually order after they drop in on the board, potentially being a good source of orders for other things around as well, while they go about achieving missions. Otherwise, the core command section of the army is intact. Lord Solar Leontus, Ursula Creed, a platoon command squad with the Mortar and the Master Vox. Put that all together with some attaching units, and you've got fields of fire where you want it, and long-range, high-quality orders from Lord Solar. Just a single tank commander this time, taking multi-melter sponsons, a small unit of 5 Scions, probably to drop for objectives I guess, 2 units of Kasrkin once more, and then a fairly similar artillery section, a Basilisk, 2 Manticores, and a couple of Scout Sentinels to mark for things. The artillery pieces take heavy flamers this time to repel anyone who trespasses too close. I think probably the coolest thing about this list is being able to take both big blocks of Scions and a big squad of Attilan Rough Riders and go out and win a grand tournament with them. They're certainly very dangerous units that can deal a whole ton of damage, but just aren't really too hard to kill in return. They might need a bit of careful play against certain opponents with big Overwatch, or things that could screen or hit them first. Let's talk about the core of the orders and command section for the Guard at the moment. As expected, Lord Solar Leontus does feature in literally every list here. It's basically auto-included at 125 points. Farming 1 command point per turn keeps the stratagems coming, can help with reinforcements if you're going for that, plus just all the other good things that Guard can do. And then having that paired with 3 orders that can affect things like tank commanders, artillery, or Bullgryn is rather great. Never mind his redeploys as well, and never mind the fact that he's not actually got an awful close combat profile. Basically the equivalent of a Space Marine captain, so in the last few turns of the game he can certainly make his presence felt and try and do a bit of counter-charging for enemies that are trying to close your lines. I think it might be nice if not every single guard list had to basically start with this guy, but there's not really much reason to leave him at home currently. Lord Solar is often seen in combination with a platoon command squad. Both him and these guys can attach to the same infantry squad type units, and the combo can allow Lord Solar's orders to be broadcast via the radio, using the unit's Master Vox rule to send those powerful orders out to Bullgryn's tank commanders or artillery that aren't right close to him. Not every list chooses to use that combo, and Lord Solar's absolutely fine on his own, but many see it as a bit too good to pass up. Otherwise they're just generally helpful. You can have a medic for a 6+ feel no pain in the unit, a standard bearer for +1 objective control, though it seems that most lists are often having to choose between the two of them there, as it's quite fashionable to take a mortar in this unit. A little bit of indirect fire that can help throw out fields of fire if you want with Ursula Creed for free, so you often get a mortar included for that purposes, as well as just being able to potentially contribute a tiny bit of damage where needed, while the overall command section remains safe. Talking of Ursula Creed, she's also near enough considered auto-include in plenty of guard lists. 55 points for 2 more orders to regiment units, both of which can go on her own unit if you'd like to. But really the big value is making one regiment unit hand out a 0 CP stratagem, often used on fields of fire, to give one of the enemies a big AP debuff. If you don't use it on that, it could be command rerolls, such as rerolling a las cannon or a failed save, but that's by far the best use of it in my opinion. She doesn't have to be attached to that unit either, so could just be run alongside some Kasrkin, or potentially even just hiding out of line of sight if you absolutely know that the opponent can't reach her at all. Moving on, here's the third list, this one by Sam Nash at that same Oxford Super Major tournament, going 5-1 against 240 players, and as mentioned only stopped by the other guard list that placed second. This one's maybe not so very different from the former one. Much of the same elements, but trading out a few Bullgryns for a little bit of mechanization with a couple of Chimeras. In this one we've got the command section with Lord Solar Leontus, the platoon command squad and Ursula Creed. They'll be joined by one of the infantry squads, and that one also provides a mortar for a bit more reliability of getting those hits. Again, there's 2 tank commanders here, a Demolisher, las cannon, multi-melters and heavy stubber, one of these taking Grand Strategist for 1 more tank order, which could be helpful for artillery depending on where the Lord Solar orders are going. This time there's 12 Bullgryn, 1 unit of 6 and 2 of 3, 2 units of Kasrkin once more, which I'd guess would be taking a lift in the Chimeras. Potentially you could do some order tricks by officers disembarking from Chimeras due to their mobile command vehicle special rule. Then there's 1 Basilisk once more slowing down some units, and 2 Manticores with heavy bolters, and then this time 2 Scout Sentinels with las cannons, lighting the way for the firepower. Taking a look at that guard indirect fire, and the Basilisk and Manticores, as you can see, are pretty much the most popular ones right now. I was honestly kind of expecting the Manticore to lose a bit of ground versus the Medusa carriage, and a few people do like those, but it seems that for the majority of these competitive lists, the Manticores are still winning out, despite their big points increase they took all the way up to 180 points. In any case, the Basilisk is a pretty excellent all-around unit, 135 points for a great big gun with d6+3, strength 8, AP2 and damage 2 attacks. A pretty nice general purpose profile that's good at killing Space Marines. It does pay attacks and damage for its indirect fire, but having just a bit of that is just amazing for taking down things like enemies trying to grab objectives, or just piling a bit of damage on the absolute thing that most needs it, whether or not it's just a really fragile but dangerous enemy unit trying to hide out of line of sight, or plinking the last few wounds off an enemy unit that's taken tons of damage. The Basilisk gets tons of value from its special rule though, which is Earthshaker rounds. This is the one that allows them to have -2 to move, advance and charge for an infantry unit that you hit with it. And that can be absolutely game changing in the right circumstances, maybe preventing some scary melee troops from getting to combat. Certainly extra painful for anything that's kind of slow, maybe things like Death Shroud Terminators for the Death Guard. They really don't like to be moving 2 inches. Overall, I feel like they're just hard to go wrong with, even if it's just to have 1 copy of that special rule, and there's plenty of buffs to make them stronger. They can be ordered by Lord Solar or tank commanders, have some indirect penalties removed by Sentinels marking targets, and get fields of fire for extra AP when it's needed against really tough save foes. Born Soldiers certainly helps out a bit as well, given that they're usually static. Otherwise though, for 180 points we have the Manticore. This one throws out d6+1, strength 10, AP2 and damage 3 shots. Again, it can be hitting on a 2+, like the Basilisk if it's both ordered and has a Sentinel marking the target. Pretty scary and fairly reliable firepower there, and it's a profile that's fairly universal. It's going to be felt by just about anything that you hit with it, particularly with Blast giving you more attacks against bigger squads and getting to reroll hit rolls against any enemy units that have 5 or more models in them. The damage 3 can be extra nice for threatening heavier things, plus 3 wound infantry in particular. Both the artillery units can be alright to move around a little bit in the late game as well. When staying alive at all costs isn't the biggest deal in the world, they could go heading towards midfield objectives, still putting out a fair amount of firepower, as most things that aren't dedicated anti-tank units will still struggle to take them down, and at movement 10 they can certainly get about. Next up is this list by David Gaillard of 40k Fireside, who used it to take second at the Manchester Super Major, going 6-1 against 260 players. They've got plenty of content on their channel talking through guards lists like this, and certainly do a far better job than me at explaining them, so certainly feel free to check them out. Again, really quite a few similar units here, maybe a little lighter on the characters than some. There's just literally a tank commander, Lord Solar Leontus, and Ursula Creed. There's no platoon command squad here, so Lord Solar's not going to be throwing out those orders particularly far, maybe focusing on the core artillery pieces. I think the plan here might often be to run Lord Solar solo from what I understand. Creed could be handing out fields of fire with the infantry squad, perhaps with a mortar. There's then 3 big units of Kasrkin here, 3 units of 10 with the melters, plasmas, marksman rifles and melter mine. One squad seems to swap its melter guns for volley guns. 9 Bullgryns here, 1 unit of 6 and 1 of 3, and then really quite a hefty artillery component, 2 Basilisks and 2 Manticores, and 2 Scout Sentinels to mark for them. Otherwise there's a single Chimera with 2 heavy flamers, with Kasrkin inside that could be scouting towards the midboard. And finally there's a single Lehman Russ battle tank, a las cannon and multi-melter sponsons, apparently deciding not to upgrade to the Demolisher tank commander for this particular one. It does get some nice rerolls against things on objectives, and spammed battle cannon fire is pretty effective against lots of stuff. Looks like the only loss that he took here was to the event-winning Necrons, though I've certainly seen his list topping GTs in the past. Another unit that seems to be near enough omnipresent in these lists is the Scout Sentinel, something I would consider just about auto-include in virtually any guard army list. 60 points for these guys are just immense value. They're really tough for that points cost. 7 wounds with a 3+ save at toughness 7 is more than most infantry units can handle comfortably. They move really quite fast at 10 inches, can genuinely threaten tanks a bit with a las cannon plus hunter-killer missile, and even aren't completely worthless in close combat with those sentinel chainsaws, could account for a light infantry or 2. All of that on a scouting walker that moves kind of fast is already at least fairly good stuff. The other rule that makes them truly auto-include is daring recon, meaning that you can mark one enemy unit within 18 inches of them to ignore the penalties for indirect fire to bring down some massive rains of hurt with basilisks and manticores. And just in general for other things shooting those units you get reroll ones to hit against them, which certainly does have a big impact. In general they tend to get fielded in just single units of 1, so you get more copies of that rule. I still feel like fielding in bigger units maybe isn't the most awful idea in the world. Potentially a bigger 180 point squad of them, it can just be very problematic for the enemy to try and take down, and when they do you can bring them all back with reinforcements if you fancy. Running solo does seem to be the way for most people, usually with a las cannon though. Finally for our last list of the day, this list was run by an Eero Saukonen who used it to take first at the Talvisoto Winter Assault tournament here, and this one has Manticores in style, 3 of them being used to take the list to a 5-0 victory. Fairly good representation of most of the stuff that we've talked about already. The Guard Command section with the Platoon Command Squad and Leontus tied together with a Death Corps squad, 2 Tank Commanders with a Demolisher and Multi-Melters, Ursula Creed, 3 Kasrkin and 2 units of 6 Bullgryn, and then a veritable rain of missiles with 3 Manticores with a whole load of those strength 10 and damage 3 shots. Should be able to just sledgehammer the most important enemy unit off the board each turn. And to mark the way for them there's 2 Scout Sentinels, this time they're using plasma cannons as opposed to las cannons. Overall certainly a pretty honed looking list here, very much focused on the themes it's going for. Some nice bully units to hold the midfield, big damage threat with the tank commanders, and all the while keeping up the range of death with the Manticores with the sheer amount of damage 3. Finally, for our look at the commonly played units, the last data sheet to focus on is the Tank Commander. 205 points for what's to all intents and purposes just a basic Lehman Russ chassis, just the choice of every single one of the turret guns. Most players opting for the Demolisher Cannon as it just has by far the best damage per stats against most targets, even if you are sacrificing the range of the thing. Tank Commanders definitely bring the damage in their own right. Most choose to run them with multi-melters, maybe plasma cannons as an alternative. A las cannon on the hull, a heavy stubber on top for a little bit of anti-infantry, plus a hunter-killer missile. They can't get orders from themselves, but Lord Solar can order them if you really want to bring the anti-tank hurts to some enemies moving up to the midfield. You can order any other vehicle units that you have while that's happening, often the artillery like Basilisk or Manticores. And then for one of the nastiest threats that it has, if the thing happens to be destroyed, you get the rather big consolation prize on shooting on death on a 2+. And getting the full firepower of a demolisher tank in the enemy's turn can be absolutely enormous, can take out something important that your opponent was just about to shoot with. Again, maybe not too hard to see why these guys are being played as some of the most common Rust variants. Compared with the Demolisher, you're only paying 5 points extra for the shoots on death plus the order, which most people seem to think outweighs the fires in combat for no penalty and firing into melee with blast things. Overall, definitely some clear messages as to what's working well for the Guard right now. Kasrkin and Bullgryn fighting for the midfield with a big command section in the back, a couple of tank commanders and a bunch of artillery with some Sentinels, and you can't go too far wrong. I would still stress that despite the convergence of these lists, there's lots of other options that are very usable. You can absolutely put together some very strong different Guard lists to these things, and they can be downright strong at most levels of play. At the absolute top tier of the game, though, I guess you tend to get a bit more honing as to the units that really function at a top Grand Tournament level. In any case, let me know your thoughts on the units and armies. Look forward to hearing your ideas down in the comments below. Feel free to clarify anything that I might have missed or misunderstood in these ones as well. There certainly usually tend to be a few things that aren't my army lists after all. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I'm sure we'll have more for the Imperial Guard in due course. And finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.